It sounds to me like what you're saying is that how well an individual learns in this context, we're talking about multimedia environments, how well an individual learns depend on how well the environment in which they're learning is designed to learn. Yeah. And how well the environment is designed to learn depends on how well the designer learns about his or her own learning meaning needs and the learning needs of the individuals whose learning he or she is attempting to facilitate or nurture. Does that sort of sum it up?
Yeah. I mean, if somebody's not beginning to get more in touch with their own meaning need process as the kind of ground of how they're designing things, then their design is going to proceed from a kind of statistical analysis and not from the ground of the kind of needs or the quality or source of needs that learners really have. So yes, absolutely. And that again, it comes back to the design intention. I want to say that if somebody's design intention in the interface, which I'm going to show right after the break at this point, I guess, whether it's the interface itself, the kind of content that's flowing through it, the different types of media that are flowing through it, but most importantly, the semantic transactions, what it is that's occurring right there behind the intention of the design and the actual experience of who's experiencing the design. If there's not mutual learning going on right there, then it's a loudspeaker system. It's better than it was, but it's still a projectile system, and it's not going to evolve to create the kind of response environments that I think these various trends I've been talking about in the world are calling forth.
It's fascinating, isn't it, David, that it seems that the entertainment world is moving in the same direction. Is that the entertainment world, from what I'm seeing out there in the marketplace, is that they too, even television, are beginning to recognize that engaging people in what they call interactive systems is becoming more and more important. So it seems as if the animal is beginning to raise its head out there.
Yeah.
It's not just in education. We're not talking about learning as it applies only to the classroom.
Right.
This orientation shift that you're talking about, it seems to me, is not just about designing electronic technologies. This goes deeper to the way we think about what it means to be a person, really.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, after the break we can talk a little bit about Nintendo, for example. After I show a little bit of technology that demonstrates some of these points, I mean, one of the questions that's really fascinated me is why is it we sold 30 million Nintendo machines in such a short period of time? What is it about these machines that are allowing or creating a space in which 4-year-olds, right, 4-year-olds through teenagers are just being pulled into it? I mean, forgetting about the goods or bads or moralities of whether or not they're addicted and some of the content of the game, what is it about the experience dynamics that's so engaging? Because I think that's the same point that we've been talking about, that people are hungry for a response at a level that the system right now can't even see. It's like the system awareness is it's almost as if we're trying to look at submicron stuff with a telescope. That we're talking about a kind of range of needs, these meaning needs that I'm describing, that we can't see with our regular systems. Even television and the entertainment industry is beginning to realize, as you point out, and if we look at what's happening in multimedia, if we look at what's happening in terms of computer platform, its dexterity, what's happening in the entertainment industry, yeah, they are beginning to create the kind of gymnasium that I think is coming in the future, which will go through this orientation shift away from trying to produce more effective propaganda or more effective missiles to fire at people and begin to evolve this kind of mutual relationship, which is calling people out, inviting people to become more participative in the flow of their own experience, and not just because this is philosophically nice or altruistic, but because this is fundamentally relevant to how it is that people have something to offer in the world from a point of view of how well they can produce and create and learn.
So would it be accurate to say that you are using technology to model or to be a speaker, as it were, a conduit, a vehicle for modeling this new relationship that you're talking about.
Yes, yes. And one of the things that we'll get into is what we call the learner scope, which is a metaphor for how it is. Assume we had a microscope with a series of different lenses, so to speak, that would allow people to adjust the lens until what it was they were pursuing was clear. Right? Adjust the representations, adjust references, adjust styles, adjust all this stuff so that the individual person could really come home. That's what we're going to talk about, this afternoon.
Okay, so in the next session we'll get into the actual technology and the learner interface and start looking at the screens. And I think that we should now take a break.
Welcome back to the MTU special series, Multimedia, the Emerging Giant, and David Boulton's presentation, Designing Multimedia.
Okay, so we're back. I hope everybody enjoyed the break as much as we did. Well, David, I think a good launching off point here is the concept that you mentioned, which was the learner scope. And let's look into that learner scope, let's get into the technology, and let's see how all these ideas that we've heard from you, this whole orientation shift, now manifests itself in a way of designing technology which optimizes the learning orientation for both the learner and the designer. Okay.
Let's go back to the metaphor of a learner scope for just a moment, and then we'll pop something on the screen that will kind of concretize it for us. The learner scope is one of a series of metaphors that have evolved over time to kind of give us some kind of a thought handle on what it is we're trying to design, some kind of a thought experiment. And that what we started with was to say, imagine that we had a microscope, the metaphor of a microscope, and that instead of having one ring of lenses, that it had a multitude of rings of lenses. That one, for example, would allow somebody to spin through different attitudes or biases or cognitive slants or sensory embellishments, so to speak, until somehow what was on the slide started to be more appealing, more engaging, more coherable for who was learning. And that once they got into the right general frame of reference, point of view, or what we call representation, that as they then traveled along and they encountered a particular multimedia object, a picture or a sound or a word or a sentence or a phrase, that they could then spin a secondary set of lenses until the meaning there became real clear for them. Again, the idea of the learner scope would be that the number one thing is to create an environment in which the person who's learning and the meaning intention, the deep intention behind the materials intended to facilitate their learning, would come into contact with one another. By not creating some one way, no matter how rich it was in media, but by creating a system with a multiplicity of different alternatives embedded into any given object or experience domain, that then somebody would turn these lenses until that experience was clear for them. So the learner scope, one other thing about the idea of a learner scope that's helpful to think about is that while we're doing this, while we have this slide, which we'll say for the moment represents a learning objective or a particular piece of database segment,